Hit
Folks,
me.
welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in this world. And as we continue to go through fundamental changes at every level of evolution, humanity, it is important, as I've been doing for the last 10 years, to promote my elders and the values that they learned from their elders about how to communicate non-verbally, how to make love on the bandstand, how to have a conversation, how to keep a gig, and in hopes of the idea that we can rebuild camaraderie on the bandstand and give the general public a recognition or maybe some enlightenment that in fact a musician represents a real profession, which my guest lived through the gravy years of that, but we are now sort of on the tail end of musicians, at least my generation at 42 years young and younger, really being part of the working poor. And I got a chance today to speak to really a guy I've been looking for a long time. He was part of the milieu of Jerry Mascucci and Fania Records, and he was a master with Bones Malone and Levon Helm, and it all started back at North Texas with guys like Bruce Fowler, and I don't know, he's just pretty much done it all, and also has a lot of wisdom that he can apply to younger cats who are trying to look towards the light and not the dark. Blue Lou Marini, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you, Jer. Pleasure.
Yo, can you talk about before, like, were you a Dolphy cat or a Coltrane cat or a Stan Getz cat, or all three?
Well, when I grew up, my dad was my first teacher. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and my dad loved the big bands, and so the first music I heard was probably Woody Herman and Stan Kenton and Count Basie, and not as much Duke Ellington in my initial years. And then there were a few singular albums that made a giant impression on me. One was Stan Getz, and hearing Stan Getz, and then when I became aware of some of the other, I bought this album called Le Grand Jazz, which was Michel Legrand, and he featured Ben Webster on it, and I think Thad Jones was on it, and Phil Woods, and there was a wide variety of stuff on it. So that was an ear opener to me. And then I happened to pick up Sketches of Spain, which totally blew my mind, and that opened me up to a lot of other music. So, I went to like a lot of my contemporaries, I went to the National Stage Band camps. Randy Brecker and I realized that we met at the camps in probably 1961. David Sanborn and I were roommates.
Oh my God! Are you
played
kidding
in,
me,
in
dude?
John Laporta's headband there.
Wait, hold on for a second. I just want to be clear. Was the Stan Getz record for musicians only? Was it a bop? Was it a bop record, or was it more like a Woody Herman record?
Yeah, it was no, it was a bop record. It might have been for musicians only. I'm not sure now. I think it might still be at my sister's with some of my dad's.
No, we're gonna have to dig that. We're gonna have to dig that out. No, Blue Lou, I want to ask you something. I mean, because go back to Basie, or maybe even more Basie. There were four instruments in the rhythm section, so the foundation was so strong. Freddie Green, you had a bass player, Basie, and then the drummer, Sonny Payne or Harold Jones. That foundation of rhythm, Lou, is gone in modern music for a lot of reasons. But were you aware of that rhythm, and did it allow you, at least when you were listening to those records, to formulate your own individual sound by blowing over the top of that? Because I don't know, the guitar at that time, I mean, in the 50s, the guitar was still considered a rhythm instrument.
Yeah,
And
plunking away.
Yeah.
Well, I heard Basie's band when I was 15. My dad took me to Myers Lake Park in Canton, Ohio, which was like a band shell kind of bandstand, and I was standing right in front of them, and they did one of those tunes where they play the last 4 bars or 8 bars 3 times, and each time softer, and then on a rim shot or a snare drum hit, suddenly they're triple forte. And I remember feeling like those ads that were in the 80s or whenever they were, where the guy is sitting on a chair in front of on a leather chair in front of a set of speakers, and his hair is streaming straight backwards from the sound.
Yeah, the analog.
That's what
I
it
love
felt
that.
like, man.
Yeah.
Fucking thrilling, but I was playing along with records. That's what, like, I think I was 13 when I first went to the Stan Kenton camps, or 14 maybe 15. But I went 2 summers in a row, and I heard a lot of people. I heard Donald Byrd there, and he just killed me. And when you were talking about the spiritual dimension, I thought of because I later ended up playing on the faculty of the camps went through. At first they were the Kenton camps, and then they split off, and they were the National Stage Band camps, and then they became the Jamie Ingersoll clinics. So at one point, I was on the faculty, and usually I would organize one of the nights of music for the kids, and Ted Dunbar was on the faculty.
Oh, my God, the numerologist, dude, the genius.
Yeah.
Holy cow, Dunbar.
And I remember Ted, we were talking about religion, and Ted said, church is on the bandstand. and I always loved that,
Dude,
and
that is
that's the way
beautiful.
I've always considered it, it's when everybody is really hooked up and everyone is really listening, that's when you ascend, and that doesn't happen very often, but we strive for it,
Well, it's also really interesting because, in a lot of monotheistic religions, people sit there and they listen to a pastor or rabbi who is supposedly being a conduit for information, then passing it to the parishioners, when in fact on the bandstand, when you guys are all on that frequency, you're all a conduit for the divine, right? I mean, you get out of the way of that, and I think that that's the salvation in music, when you recognize that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this evolution, is that, just recognizing that you are merely only partially responsible for what's coming through your apparatus, and in fact, you're really a channel or a conduit for music coming through you from the heavens. You are a direct conduit, and I wanted to know, because there's a lot of cats, from the older generation. I've talked to enough studio musicians to know that there are guys around that have more money than they know what to do with. They have all the accessories. They have gold records. They have, all sorts of accomplishments, but the phone has stopped ringing, and they're resentful and bitter because they truly believe that the guitar solos they played on those gold records, or the things that they sang on those records, they were fully responsible for, but they're not. And I just wanted to know, when you got the memo, that you were merely a conduit for the music coming through you from the heavens.
Well, when the most evident place is when you're playing really well, and things are flowing, and you're operating on that level where it's energy and sound. The thought can creep in that, hey man, I sound pretty good, and as soon as that thought surfaces, then you're right back into normal life again. So, I talked to Dizzy Gillespie about this, and he said it had only happened to him 2 or 3 times in his life where he felt that connected, and so if somebody like Diz feels that way, the fact is that most guys don't, I don't think most most guys consciously are, I don't want to say workmanlike place, but it's in a practical place. And the connection, when it happens, is often really unexpected. I had an example of it recently. Tom Malone booked a gig for Gil Goldstein and Danny Gottlieb and Mark Egan and myself.
Oh, my God. That is a... Wait, during COVID?
And Chris Rogers. No, it was right before. It was last fall. And we played we played acoustically in a 150 seat auditorium. And I had played with all those guys so much, and I especially have always loved Gil and Mark and Danny. And man, it was so loose and so creative and so spontaneous, and also such a pleasure to not have to deal with any amplification or anything electric to get in. The only thing electric was Mark's little Marini bass amp, and so it just felt like a conversation, and that feeling is, that's so great. And the thing we envy about our heroes is that they were working 5 and 6 nights a week, playing 3 and 4 sets a night,
absolutely,
playing the same music. And when you do that, something happens. It takes that time and familiarity, and also, when you're playing with great players, they're always out exploring. So that's why, for me, Miles's quintets are still sort of the apogee of what we want to do. And one thing I realize when I go out and do college clinics, that serious young players are still listening to that series of albums with that quintet, and the series of albums with Train and Cannonball, and those are high watermarks of intuition and connection, and it's like pro basketball.
Dude, Lulu, man, I'm having this. You're making my day. Yeah, no, it's at a. No, I just want to be clear. Let's just break this down, like the Sketches of Spain, but more like the 65. The Plug Nickel sessions. They're the you said effigy. Well, I forget the word you used, but it's sort of like the gold standard. Is it because it was those
quintets, and also the quintet with Wayne Shorter and Johnny Williams? That quintet. Some of these things that have emerged, which also recordings of the quintet live, when they were really, really stretching, man. They were operating out in the zone, And to me, that is where those electric albums of Miles are.
Right.
And it's always really annoyed me that they aren't, that there's an element of the jazz sort of cognoscenti that dismisses that electric phase of Miles. And to me, that shit is fucking believable.
Dude, that's the best shit in the world. Well, I just want to going back to the Tony and Ron, Wayne Shorter, the 65. Was it merely is it beyond the intuition and intergalactic nature of the music and the fact that it was actually being commercialized and you could sell records doing this stuff? Was it merely that they were, taking the traditional standard tunes and leaving the head and then quadrupling the time or halving the time and then coming back in? So you would actually maybe potentially not recognize what the tune was, but they were breaking up time and form, or are there other things that make it, aside from just the musicianship, the gold standard?
Well, the cardinal element of that is trust. I feel like that band, there's a certain aura that someone can create, and I think Miles was, he must have been a genius at that. But in my own experience, like I used to work for a period of about 10 years from the late 70s when I was playing with Levon. We had a band with Lou Soloff and Ronnie Huber and myself and Richie Crooks on drums and Stu Woods on bass and Joe Carroll on guitar and Mac.
Oh, my God.
And
what's the name of the
that
band? What was the name of the
was
band?
one of the loosest bands I've ever played with. And the reason was that Mac, I mean, if you started off the night and on your first solo you played a 3 or 4 minute solo, that was cool with Mac. You know, there was you never felt any. There were no there was no boundaries.
Right.
Right. And you know, we used to play that tune, "Gilded Splinters," which is this slow D minor blues. And
Sure.
I'm telling you, man, there were nights when if the audience, if someone casually had walked in, they might have thought that Sun Ra was playing. It was fucking out there.
Really?
You know?
I mean, that.
And Mac had that kind of freedom, and I think it's that implicit trust that says whatever you do is cool. And so if you're in that kind of situation when you're playing like that, stuff happens that doesn't normally happen. You know, that was what it felt like that night with on Tom's gig with Danny and Mark and Gil. And then they told me that they had a trio together in college called the Egg Trio for Egan, Gottlieb, and Goldstein. And so they were already, you know, it's not a surprise that I had always loved playing with them. But,
University of Miami, right?
Prompted me to, that prompted me to, we were set to record an album with the great engineer Jay Messina in a studio here in New York in the first week of May with Danny and Gil and Mark. And I was going to call it the Egg and I. And we were going to record acoustically with no headphones. We found a good studio where we could have that kind of sound. And so we would be playing like we had played that gig that Tom had set up, where you're not trapped with the headphones on, and you're just playing like we were just playing in a room, you know. But then COVID happened, and so all of that is postponed.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask you a question. Like this gig in the fall with Bones and Egan and Gottlieb and Gil, there was basically just it was the natural ambient stage sound. Was there a PA system, or you just guys weren't plugged in? There was no monitors on stage.
No, because it was such a small, it was like the traditional box, oblong box kind of room, you know, all wood. You pick up your horn in there on the little stage, which was only like 6 inches or a foot high at most above the chairs, and you loved your sound. That's another cardinal aspect of it, man. You know, we're operating in a realm of sound, and if it doesn't sound good, it just makes it so much more difficult to play and to interact but it sounded great, and there was no preconceived notions. That Tom he had a list of tunes, and he said, "Do you want to play this?" And we'd say, like, "Let's play that." And bang, we were off into it with no thought, and that kind of playing, where everyone knows the song. We all know what we're doing here, and so now let's see where we can explore. And to me, that I think that quintet of Miles was so brave. You know, like there's a video, a black and white video of them where Wayne is playing, and his solo gets down to where he's just basically blowing through the horn and clicking the keys. He brings it down to a place where it's almost silent. You know, he's just putting air through the horn, but not actually getting a sound. And that's. I remember one time with Chick Corea and Anthony Braxton. I think it's on a record,
right,
where they're in the middle of some improvisation, and suddenly they stop, and the silence lasts for a long time, and the silence was part of it. That was the logical next thing to do from whatever they were playing. And I remember a few years ago hearing a concert of Black Cat. Geez, I'm blanking on his name, man.
What you mean?
It would be better if I could remember the names. But he played a drum solo on one of the tunes, and he during his drum solo, his groove was so deep that at one point he left out. He just stopped for 2 bars, and you could feel everybody in the audience going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Pow! And he comes back in. It was fucking killer.
Yeah,
it was one of those things that just thrilled me.
So great because the silent. I mean, because the silence and the dynamics is the music, and I think you talked about trust. I mean, the amount of times that you, Ruben, Hojo, Bones, the Stax Cats, or the RCO All Stars, or any of these, even the Lab Band 68 going back to North Texas. I mean, you guys had a chance to play live all the time. That's where the trust comes in, when guys pick each other up and you're listening to each other, and it happens nightly. Maybe you weren't playing Train, 6 nights a week, 5 sets a night. Maybe you were. But when you see serious younger cats today, they can only study that. They can't build trust on the bandstand because they might only have 70, 80 gigs a year. Maybe. I mean, there really is no touring circuit anymore. Yeah. And is there? Yeah, no. Instead of saying what we don't have, what do you try to mentor younger cats with, knowing that they are lacking the ability to get themselves? Here's the bottom line. When I interviewed Bargeron, he talked about the fact that you guys would go in the studio, these early Blood, Sweat, and Tears albums. It sounds like the whole band is hitting at the same time. But you guys you guys were playing live so much that you were pretty much ready to go. In the studios, you do the rhythm section and the horns and the vocals separately. It sounds so tight because you guys had so much live opportunity to play. So how do you
that was one thing during the recording era when we were all playing, and I always, sometimes they would say, we'll record the rhythm section first, and I always used to say, no, you should let us all play a few times first, so the rhythm section actually has an idea of what the fuck we're doing,
Dude, was that were you so I want to be clear. This is I'm so fascinated. You're saying the engineer producer was like, let's just lay down the rhythm tracks, and you're like, no, let's cook it live as a group and then break it up.
Yeah, because otherwise the rhythm section will play. They won't play the same way because they're not responding. Once they hear it and hear what we're doing, then they're going to play it differently. And that's one thing about my whole career is I just want everything live, man. I don't want to overdub. I just I want to leave my first take with the mistakes, unless they're so horrendous that they can't be fixed. But it's like your pure initial reaction. The last Blues Brothers album, called The Last Shade of Blue Before Black, we recorded it live, man. Everybody in the studio at the same time, and it just feels better. It just feels better. It's more fun.
How?
And that's.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the other thing. I mean, the fact is that I tell young students. I sort of I talk about the difficulties of this life, and the fact is that when I got to New York in '71, I started in the studios almost immediately, and I overlapped with some of the great older guys like Romeo Tenquay and Phil Bodner, who had been on those.
Dude, are you kidding me, dude?
Great
this is like
albums
the Phil Krause era guys.
Yeah, and Bernie Glow and Jim Buffington and
George Young
and the string players. Yeah, George. I'm still in contact with George all the time.
George is still. Wait, hold on. He's still with us.
Hero,
He's still with us.
Oh yeah.
Oh my dude, George
Carmel,
Young,
California.
man. That dude is my. Okay, there was a guy. I want to ask you about this one cat, because I got this album from Denny Sywell, who was the drummer for Paul McCartney, the first Wings drummer, and they put together this studio band in the late '60s. Russell George on bass, Sywell,
Oh yeah, I've worked with Russell a
George
lot. He was
Young,
a lovely guy. I mean,
and then this guy Alan Faust. Were you hip to Faust?
yeah,
Because I mean that
he was an arranger.
yeah, and they put together this just a studio band called the Happy Ass Truth Band, and it's just, George Young is playing out of his mind. I mean, they're playing Beatles tunes. And you came in '71, and like was
George
it? Yeah.
George sent me on my first jingle date. George heard about me through. Uh, I had done a clinic with Clark Terry, and we played together. And I told him I was moving to New York, and he counseled me. And then I went to. He liked one of my big band charts, and I gave him a copy. And I went down to where his big band was playing, and Soloff and Barger were in the band, and Clark played my chart, and then I got introduced to them, and they mentioned my name to George, and George called me up to sub for him on a rehearsal of a little R&B band, and he showed up at the last half hour of the rehearsal, and I remember there was a tune with soprano saxophone, and the two of us played sopranos together, and that was like from 6:30 to 7. And that was like a Wednesday night. And then 8 o'clock at night, I get a phone call from George. He says he's got a jingle tomorrow that he's double booked and he can't do, and he's sending me in. It's at such and such a studio at 10 o'clock in the morning. Bring your alto and your flute. So I show up, and it's Julius Baker, the principal flutist of the Philharmonic on flute, Vincent Gomberg, the principal oboe player, and I think Jimmy Abato, the bass clarinet player, and me. And I have to play an alto sax, play second flute to Julius Baker, and then play a little alto solo. So that was my first gig in New York, and that was because of George.
Dude, I'm almost near tears. This is making my day. This is wait, hold on. It was a symphonic jingle. What kind of jingle was this?
No, it wasn't symphonic, but it was used. It had a. I mean, the three of them were playing, flute, oboe, and clarinet, and I was playing the second flute part. But then there was a little alto, like Paul Desmond-y kind of solo on it, and it was.
It's the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. They just sound so.
Like
I mean,
that,
basically, George was saying like, "All right, we're going to send Lou into this situation. We'll see how he does." And at that point,
I don't think George knew what the gig was.
He just was double booked. Yeah, he was double booked. Yeah.
It was just that he was double booked, and he heard me play, and he said, "Well, you can do it." So I always tried to mirror that with young players in New York when I would hear young guys, and if I had the opportunity to send them in and have them get a chance to be heard, I always did it. That was a welcoming vibe in New York, But those older guys told me, like Bodner and Romeo, they told me that in the 50s and 60s that they were working basically from 9 in the morning till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Big studio orchestras, 50, 60-piece orchestras, live radio shows, live. And when you hear those specials like from New York in those years, where it's black and white and it's Sinatra and Dean Martin and Judy Garland, and they're all singing together, and the band is behind them just fucking screaming. You hear these high note trumpet parts, and you can hear everything.
Everything.
Oh, perfect.
Everything.
And so I caught basically our generation, Rubin and Soloff and Brecker and Faddis and Sanborn and George. We caught the tail end of that,
Oh, you caught a big tailwind on that.
George was playing.
George Young on this Happy Ass Truth Band album with Alan Faust and Russell. I mean, I don't know who the trumpet players are. I mean, they are just. You can hear that eerie. Anyway, I have to read this quote to you.
Have you ever interviewed George?
Oh no, I'm saying you have to hook me up immediately after the interview. I need to talk to him immediately. I mean, I'm obsessed.
Yeah,
I had no idea I thought he was long. I thought he was long gone.
No.
Here, I want to read you this.
He's still playing.
I want to read you this.
He's one of those guys also that is like one of the most fun people to talk to. We used to,
Oh,
he had this way of talking, which was called F-sharpistically speaking. So it was like a tritone away from everybody else. I got a million stories
dude,
about him.
I'm so dude, Blue, you're warming my. I want to read you this. I just did my second interview with the drummer Joe Chambers. I want to read you this, and then get your feedback, because I know you didn't get to the East Coast till the 71, but I want your opinion on this. He said, the writers and journalists had this term they were using called avant-garde. They were talking about free jazz. Stanley Crouch, rest in peace, said that the free avant-garde music is what we were doing on Blue Note, mid-60s, Grant Green or Blue Bobby Hutcherson or Joe Henderson, that kind of stuff. Not Archie Shepp and Albert Ayler. You could hear all the tradition in those Blue Note recordings. We could swing, we could play the blues, we could run through changes. Those cats, Ayler and Shepp, were around doing their thing, but they couldn't play no tunes. They couldn't play no changes. Those cats were playing altissimo, squeaks and squawks. They couldn't get a job at Radio City or backing up a singer. Eric Dolphy doesn't belong in that group because Eric was a traditional musician. He knew everything, and he played in the symphony orchestras. Pharoah Sanders was playing changes way back then. Even when Train started doing the altissimo thing, they accepted it because they had heard him play before. All that Shepp and Ayler could do is what they did. Shepp got better, and as of today, he can play changes. That does ring true, even though I was conceived in 78. I want to get your thoughts on that. Obviously you were aware of those cats, but I guess I just didn't really realize that Ayler and Shepp, and because Howard Johnson played with Shepp. Howard's about one of the most serious freaking musicians around. But do you agree with that statement in terms of free jazz? Because I don't really listen to their records a lot because it does sound like the way Joe described, but I wanted to get your feeling on what free jazz meant. Was it really just squeaks and squawks?
Well, this has to do with, of course, what Joe is talking about and being schooled players who can play anything and can sit in and do this and do that, and know the literature and know the heritage. That's a valid point, of course, and those records that he was on, those Blue Note records in the '60s are, those have stood the test of time.
Insane,
those are fucking great records.
Breaking Point, yeah, it's
like
insane,
crazy.
dude.
But at the same time, it's a question of belief,
Right,
and
right.
and those guys were reflecting something that was going on at the time, and I can see that the music of Archie Shepp and Ayler right now in Black Lives Matter would have the same kind of validity because it's a scream from the soul, man, and there's different ways of looking at your instrument. I try to show that to kids when I play. I try to tell them that when I practice, I try to imagine that if somebody hears me, they would think that it's beautiful. But at the same time, ugly can be beautiful. And, I illustrate with playing my horn in different ways and show them that the thing is a vehicle of expression. And there's times when it's not supposed to sound pretty. It's the logical conclusion of what comes next is something it's a cry or a scream or tears, So, who's the great avant-garde piano player that?
Cecil Taylor.
Cecil Taylor. I remember my initial reaction to Cecil Taylor was, Jesus, the guy's just fucking flailing around the piano. And then I heard him in concert one time, and I was awestruck. Because he had an alternate, thought-through, virtuoso technique that when I heard him in person, yeah, I was spellbound and stunned, and he blew my mind, man. You know, so sometimes you're not ready for things. I mean, I wasn't ready for Duke Ellington when I was a teenager. It sounded out of tune to me, and you know, it sounded so different than Count Basie's band. Way they swung. It took me a minute to realize what Duke was doing, and you know, we had a singular an example of it when we played at the White House with the North Texas band for LBJ, and Stan Getz and Duke Ellington sat in with our band. We had an outdoor concert on the White House lawn. And with the King and Queen of Thailand in attendance, because the King was a music fan. That's why Stan was there. He was a amateur saxophone player. And we had a Lenny Niehaus chart from the Kenton book on A Train, which was an up-tempo swinger. And Duke started off with the rhythm section, and that was with Sofa Monahan. He started off with the rhythm section going, boom, 2, 3, 2, 3, and that's the way Duke is playing A Train. And now we're going to go, and we're thinking, like, how the fuck are we getting from this 3 to our chart, you know? And I remember all of us looking at each other, and then somehow magically it just...
Magic.
Bing, we were in it, you know. It was fantastic. I'm looking at a picture right now on my 2 photos on my wall. I can see Duke Ellington at the piano and Stan playing, and us looking on the saxophone section. We're not playing; the brass section is playing. And then the picture above it is the LBJ and Lady Bird and the King and Queen of Thailand and Leon, and all of us standing up. And right on the end,
well, no, it's just so amazing because
the great bass trombone player who just passed away 2 days ago, my oldest and dearest friend.
Who's that?
So, yeah, looking at this shit fucked me up.
I'm sorry, who was the bass trombone player who passed away?
Joe Randazzo.
Randazzo just left us?
Yeah,
man,
2 days ago.
No, you know, it's funny. I was commissioned, oh, my God, about 4 years ago to do a bunch of radio interviews for a documentary on Stan Getz that never got off the ground. But in this definitive biography of him, I have a note here. Stan is summoned by LBJ to play at a State Department dinner for the King and Queen of Thailand. The King was delighted with the music and discussions he had with Stan about saxophone technique. I cannot believe Lou Marini was in that band. I cannot believe you performed with Getz. And you're saying Duke Ellington was there too?
Yeah, Duke.
Oh
Duke started
that
that
is
A Train that Stan. I think it's what Stan is soloing on while we're on looking.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, it's not easy for you to answer. You don't have dark skin, and we know what's going on now with Black Lives Matter and these things. But, like, did you ever? I mean, Soloff, Brecker, Bones. You guys loved all the music, but I mean, to me, what you're talking, I mean, you know, Archie Shepp was pressed on Impulse. That was a major label. Eiler. But these guys were making statements, inner urges and stuff. I mean, I think what Chambers was trying to also say was, like, how, like, it does come up a little bit short, not just having dexterity on your instrument. It's just, like, did you recognize that at a certain point in your career that you know, those guys, it was going to be hard to make a living, right? I mean, they couldn't play behind a band at Radio City. They couldn't back up Judy Garland on the radio. They couldn't necessarily be a traditional musician. I mean, was there ever a point in your career, even though you were writing charts and burning with the North Texas, like, did you ever get to a point where you're like, I just don't want to play commercial music, and even if I can't make a living, I'm just going to play what I want to feel? Did you ever have that kind of? I mean, to me, that's sort of the jazz life where, you know.
Well, you know, I never committed to being just solely a jazz player, but it wasn't really a conscious decision. It had to do with I started playing when I was 13, little gigs. I started on clarinet when I was 10. My dad was my first teacher. Then he had me study with a friend of his who was a wonderful natural jazz player named Frank Corby, beautiful tenor soloist. And so I was improvising right off the bat. My dad had me start playing by ear. I have a whole series of the PTA or that kind of stuff where they'd have music. And I started playing a little rock and roll band. And then when I got to North Texas, I started working 6 nights a week with Don Jacoby and Bobby Butter Burgess and a club in Dallas into my freshman year. And then I got into the recording scene there. And during the time at North Texas, I played the Ice Show, the Lipizzaner Stallions, the Fort Worth Rodeo, every kind of gig you can imagine. And the one thing that I liked it all. Yeah. It didn't warts and all. We used to play these gigs for Les Elgart. Man, Les Elgart had a great book. Playing lead alto in that band was super fun. Sight reading. I always loved sight reading. I always loved the challenge of playing, sitting down and looking at a piece of music, and just from one look at it, knowing what the tempo was, from the set, the way the rhythms looked, being able to go from playing a Mozart flute piece at 10 o'clock in the morning on a jingle, and at 11:30 having it sound like Clarence Clemens on a Bruce Springsteen kind of jingle. None of that ever bothered me. And the other thing too was that all the time that I've been playing, I was always playing in some kind of creative band as well. I have there's a double CD out that came out last year of some music we did about 3 years ago, right before Louis died. Of Tom Pearson's music, the pianist and composer from, he lived in New York for a long time and then L.A., but he's been in Japan for about 20 years. And this music is titanic, man. It's immense.
Really?
Thunderous music, and I have 4 or 5 long, big solos in it where you're playing in an abstract way, So I was never not playing in some soul-satisfying thing at the same time that I was playing commercial music, of one kind or another.
Well, that was the magical part.
And I sort of never separated them, and also I always really loved playing the other instruments. I love playing flute and clarinet and alto and tenor and soprano, and I didn't used to play very, very much, but in the past years I've been playing it with James Taylor's band, and I like it. I often thought Mike Brecker and I talked about it, and he said, he just made a decision to stop playing everything but tenor and just to throw all his energy into it, and that thought occurred to me, but I wasn't pulled to that, I wasn't pulled to it. So
I want to read, this, I have done thousands of interviews, and I just pulled this one out because I hadn't listened to it since I did it. It was with Bruce Fowler. He said, North Texas was basically a classical school. I was supposed to be learning to be a classical trombonist, which I didn't do. Lab 68 is the record I really got to play on. Marini wrote some great charts. They come from the big bands like Kenton, but he pushed it into abstractions. He used a lot of angular melodies and extreme tempos. We were listening to Miles and Dolphy. That was the golden age at the time for jazz rock. The kids were more influenced by that than anything. First of all, did Bones play electric bass in that Les Elgart band you were talking about?
Yeah, well, Bones, he's a pain in the ass with his ability on different instruments.
Yeah,
so,
dude, he's unbelievable.
I think he
was playing bass for Zappa. But no, Marini, this. So you're telling me you were going to Dallas rodeos, playing gigs, and getting paid in college, and then the lab band was like Can you talk about how much of the tunes that Fowler's talking about were like basic sketches and then allowing the guys to just blow, or were they really? I mean, when I think of abstractions, I just think of that ability to, well, you know what Dizzy was saying. He claims it only happened 2 or 3 times, but ultimately,
No, they were. I was reflecting, at that time. You're listening to all kinds of stuff, love the Beatles,
right.
the Monk at Town Hall concert that Hall Overton arranged the Monk tunes, and I remember writing a tune called "The Loneliest Monk" that we did on a fall concert with a small, like an octet, wrote it for an octet. So I was listening to so many different kinds of music, and I always have, I've always been interested in world music and electronic music and classical music, and that's been one of the, the end of CDs and records to me, of record stores, where a few years ago I was out in L.A. and there's a big record store out there that Jim Cox, the keyboard player that has sometimes played with James Taylor, he's a brilliant musician. He took me to this CD place, a record place, and it's enormous. It's like a whole block. And I was overwhelmed. And afterwards, I realized that up until the Tower Records closed in New York, there hadn't been a week in my adult life that I hadn't spent 2 or 3 hours going through a record store looking for new CDs and seeing about things that might inspire me and jog me into. Yeah, I'm working on a big band chart now. I've just gotten to where I finally learned how to use my Pro Tools and overdub a whole big band of good sounds from my new synthesizer, which my wife bought me for my birthday, and it's called the Big Bang, and it's a really abstract. It comes from a purely theoretical idea, and that is an initial soft note, which is the background radiation, and then suddenly a tremendous giant chord that goes from pedal E on the bass trombone to a high G on piccolo, and then that's held for, this is just like a mathematical idea, basically. It's held for 8 beats, and then for 7 beats, all the low instruments go up a major seventh, and all the high instruments go down a major seventh, and then for 7 more beats, they go up or down a minor seventh until they're back down to everybody ends up a tritone away from where they start. And the out thing of it is, even though these chords are totally radically different, they maintain the same value throughout. So when I heard it play back, it sounds so out, man. It's just weird, and now I've thought about all these events that will happen more like in a graphic way, where cued things happen until it ends up where the only thing you hear is the original 12-note chord being slowly played by the keyboard, and you realize that the keyboard has been playing that the whole time, and that's the background radiation noise. So that's a chart that is totally an intellectual idea. It has nothing to do with the initial chord is a very out chord, and inside the chord there's a B dominant 7th chord, just a straight up dominant 7th chord. It's voiced F sharp, B, D sharp, A ascending, but surrounding those notes, the chord is low E, B flat, F, C, F sharp, B, D sharp, A, D, G sharp, C sharp, G, going from the bottom of the piano to the top. And, the chord itself is a strident out chord that just sounds so weird, but I'm looking forward to hearing it. I've been rehearsing a big band. Of course, I haven't been able to do it since all this stuff happened, but I'm writing a bunch of music.
This is really important because again, this is one of these things that's very subtle, but we have this technology today, and we've had mechanization of rhythm, so you have human beings basically comping machine parts. One of the things I have an issue with is just the rhythm was so. I don't care if you're working with Gary Chester or Bill Lavorgna or whoever, the Schwartzberg or whoever, Gadd. I mean, everybody had their own individual drumming sound, and it was so angular. I just want to read this. This is from my interview with Spinoza. He said, let's take miking the drums as an example. If you have a drummer who balances himself really well, Bernard Purdy, Steve Gadd is great at it, Rick Marotta, the way they balance between their bass drum, snare drum, and hi-hat, the volumes of each drum. If they do it well, you can use less mics because they're giving it to you the way you want to hear it anyway. Nothing depends on any one thing 100%. Who are you miking? Are you miking Bernard Purdy, or are you miking your cousin whose snare drum is way louder than his bass drum? Then you better put six mics.
Sounds like Spinoza.
Yeah, then you better put 6 mics on it because you're going to have to rebalance it later. If the musician is really good within himself, he can balance himself perfectly. You don't have to have everything separate. I don't have any one miking technique. It depends on the type of music that's being played. I would always say, the point is, you guys, the brilliance of you guys, and maybe you can harken back to an early studio session, especially with a big band or a large brass section. But I mean, you guys knew how to balance yourselves in the studio because you might have only had 1 or 2 mics. Not everybody had a mic. Not every piece, and I know you're not a drummer, but today with the technology, every piece of the drum kit is mic'd. So there's no space.
Well, that's this. I plan to record the big band, and there's a studio where we recorded the Blues Brothers record, which is a big open studio right across the river in New Jersey. And again, with Jay Messina, who's one of the great engineers.
He's the man, yeah.
We're going to do it the old way, with 1 mic for the saxes, 1 or 2 mics for the trumpets, 1 or 2 mics, and with the mics far away from the horns, so that there's a chance for the sounds to combine, so that you don't hear the alto sax 90% and 10% of the tenor, or 5% of the tenor next to him and 5% of the baritone next to him on the other side. So you hear 100% of 5 saxophones blending together. And, I was thinking about what you were saying. I thought you were going somewhere about drum machines and the mechanization of it.
Oh, yeah.
And synthesizers, too. But the thing that Mike, I remember one time Mike and I were talking about it, and he says, well, the thing is, drum machines don't have any fun. And that's the same thing. The corollary to that is with synthesizers. With musicians, any 2 players are going to, playing any 2 notes, are making subtle adjustments in their sound, the way they color the overtones of their sound to combine in a pleasing way. And I've done gigs where all the track is all synthesizers, and you have it's a nightmare to try to play in tune. You can play a C concert and have it analyze the C on the track and play the C on your horn, and on a tuner, strobo tuner, it's exactly in tune. You play that note in the track along with the synthesizers, and the way that they don't make any adjustment for one another, and the way the overtones clash, and you can't play the note in tune. It's just your ear won't. You can't find it. It's a strange thing, but the truth of it is that the machines and the synthesizers are still brutally crude compared to the subtlety of the human ear and the human heart and the human soul.
Is it merely a bottom line thing?
We had a beautiful example of this. We were talking about this with a group of kids out in Nebraska. Tom Malone and I, and Tom plays in that band with the Lieutenant Dan band, and there was a fine trumpet player named Kirk something. I don't remember his name. But I said something about, this very thing. I said, any good guys will take any three notes and make them sound together. I said, and I turned to Tom and Kirk and I said, let's just play a note together. Just play a note out of the blue. And I gave a downbeat, and we played three notes, and they were so perfectly in tune that the kids, they actually had a moment where their jaws dropped. And it wasn't a triad or anything. It was just three widely, who knows what it was. But it was the perfect example of what I was saying, and so, Larry and I, from the time we met in Blood, Sweat, and Tears, we were brothers, and we never let more than a month or so go by without having an hour-long phone conversation. And, of course, involved in what's going on in the world, and during these years of Trump, of course, we were constantly talking about all of that stuff. But
dude, I want to just
Larry.
I just want to say that when I interviewed him in 2014, he talked about. It's an excerpt in my third book that's about to come out, and it's like, he talked about all the culture, and especially a lot of these places being pushed off the street, especially places like Harlem, which get very gentrified. But he basically was saying when people forget where they came from, that's how you get another Hitler. And it's so insane. He was so spot on. And I remember at the time, part of my show, I started my show 10 years ago because I could feel, I didn't know where exactly we were going, but I knew that this is where we were headed to. And I started my show because of the fever and the mad cow disease that is rotting our country from the inside out. And Willis nailed it. It's just, anyway, he is, you have, by the way, I just want to be very clear. We haven't really touched on it. The two, well, especially New Blood, but those Blood, Sweat, and Tears albums with Larry Willis and you and Bargeron and Soloff and Columby and Fielder and or McClure, it's the funkiest, coolest, nastiest music I've ever heard in my life. I can't stop. Like, just the idea of doing Snow Queen into Maiden Voyage. How hip is that? And it just cooks. This is the Blues Brothers album, the record you want to do with Messina. You were very prophetic about this, where only one or two mics, and then you allow the distance between the mic and the instrument to blend the sound. Is that basically how you recorded everything from 71 through maybe, I don't know, through the late 70s, early 80s, before electronic, synthesizers and sequencers and drum machines came into play? I really want you to go deeper on this cascade.
No, because in the studios you were subject to whatever engineer and whatever kind of thing they did, but I used to always, I have various clear ideas about headphone mixes, for one thing.
Right.
I always thought that we should all have the same mix, and that you should adjust your playing to be able to hear yourself the way you want to hear in the mix itself. So that, because what would happen on a date is, you sit down and play one note, and I need more of myself and less of the drums, And I always used to think, like, fuck, we haven't even played the tune yet. We haven't played 8 bars of the tune. How do you know what you want already?
Exactly, but why do people miss this
stuff?
So
we're actually playing it, And so the whole thing about recording, I want to take, my feeling is to, like, when I'm in charge of things, I try to do it like a benevolent despot, like I don't want to say a fucking thing until we're halfway there, and I'm always asking the guys, what do you think? What do you think about this? What should we do here? What do you like about this? And then usually when you're doing that, especially with good players, the best idea becomes obvious, and somebody will say the best idea. And I remember clearly I had written an arrangement on the tune "Itch and Scratch," Rufus Thomas tune that we did, and there was a modulation towards the end. And remember when we were rehearsing it, we were talking about now. Let's see, how do we finesse this modulation, And we tried a few different things, and then Pendarvis says, no. What we do is we go directly to the other key with no intermediate modulation material. We just go direct, and we did it, and it was perfect, and it was so perfect that we did. I think it might have been Milk Cow Boogie or one of those.
Oh, Pendarvis? Yeah. Oh, you're talking about
the horns.
Yeah.
The horns were overdubbing, and at one point there was a unison hit, and when we played it, it was so together that we all started laughing, and so we had to do it again. It was just one of those moments where it was just so great, It was, we hit it, and it was so perfect that everybody burst into laughter, and then they couldn't keep it, so we had to redo it, But those moments, those are those little magic moments that you live for,
Blue Lou, can you talk about, I didn't mean to cut you off before about Larry Willis, because I love the guy so much, and I never even met him, but, Cooper, Ronnie Cooper, you, Larry Willis, Bones, George Young, Randazzo, Phil Krause, if there is an essence for those spirits that have left us and those that are still here, if there is an aesthetic and an essence and an attitude and an urgency and the approach to the music that you can verbally express to younger cats, the two things that I notice, and it has to do with recording techniques, and it also has to do with my generation and younger's hang-ups on perfection because of technology. We have to get things perfect, which is that imperfection is perfection. And basically, the two words that come to mind anytime I listen to you guys, and I don't care what genre of music it is, attitude and urgency, and pulse, and tension and release. And I just, for all those that we've lost through this horrible illness, disease, and and those that have come before you, and those that are still here, what is the essence and the that you would like to talk to them about the necessity of playing music as if it's a matter, it doesn't matter who the engineer is, but just playing as if it's a matter of life and death. So many cats I talk to, they say, I don't feel hung up about this extended pause in COVID because I've always played every gig as if it could be my last. And I just wanted you to talk about that attitude that still remains, and that still remains with the spirits that are no longer with us.
Well, Gad and I talk about this stuff a lot, and I think the one thing that unifies all the guys that we love the most is they're still in love with the magic of music like the way it captivated them when they were kids, except as you grow older and you get more experience and you have more gravity and more weight, it becomes more profound in a way. And so, there's he and I are especially attuned to the fact that, like, you sometimes, you find yourself, you're totally wasted. The band has had to travel like crazy. The sound check is fucked up. And here you are in the gig, and you start Sure, you can call me later on the week.
I'll text you and we'll set up a time, and then also hit me to George Young's phone number. I'd love to do an interview with him. But I mean, we didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, we just went through.
I'll send you George's info.
Yeah, please be safe, man. And I hope you had fun. We're just getting started. This is really. I'll send you I'll get this up on my podcast later and send you a link to it. Okay.
All right, man.
All right, be cool.
All right, brother, straight ahead.
All right, we'll do it again. Be cool.
Later.
Yeah, later.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye. Thank you to Tom Bones Malone for getting on Blue Lou Marini and helping set this up. Such a classic cat, and also still doing it. And we need these guys more than ever. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show, and we will see.